Every government says it works for the people. Every politician promises stability, prosperity, and progress. But behind all the speeches and campaigns, there is another force that is quiet, technical, and far more powerful: the central bank. This is the story of how central banks became some of the most influential institutions in the modern world. To understand their rise, we have to go back to the 1600s, a time when Europe was unstable, governments were broke from constant wars, kings spent too much, and countries often ran out of real money. In England, King William III desperately needed money to fight a war against France. But lenders didn't trust him. The crown had a long record of not paying back its debts. Then something new was created, an institution allowed to issue paper notes, promises backed by the government's own debt. For the first time, money in circulation wasn't just metal coins. It was paper, backed by the government's credit. The Bank of England became both the king's lender and the country's main financial institution. And the lesson was simple: if you control credit, you control the state. Other nations followed this model. Sweden's Riksbank existed earlier, but the Bank of England became the real blueprint. Throughout the 1700s and 1800s, central banks spread across Europe. Governments needed reliable credit to fund wars, build empires, and support industrial growth. By the time Napoleon came to power, the link between war and finance was obvious. His armies advanced not only with gunpowder, but with borrowed money. Britain's ability to borrow through its central bank gave it the financial strength to outlast France. The pound, supported by the Bank of England, became the foundation of the global financial system. Wars were no longer won only on battlefields. They were won in the books and ledgers of central banks. The real turning point came in the 20th century. In the United States, the financial system was chaotic and unstable. Banks created their own versions of money, and every time confidence collapsed, panic spread. The most famous example was in 1907, when a crash on Wall Street spread across the entire country. Banks began to fail. People rushed to pull their money out. The entire financial system was close to collapsing, and it wasn't the government that stepped in. It was a private banker, J.P. Morgan. From his mansion, Morgan gathered the country's top financiers, locked the doors, and forced them to put up the money needed to stop the panic. In one night, a single man brought more stability to America's financial system than Congress ever had. For politicians, this was both embarrassing and frightening. America needed an institution that could do what Morgan did, but do it for the nation, not for one individual. So in 1913, after years of debate and secret meetings on Jekyll Island, a private retreat where bankers and politicians designed the plans, Congress created the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve was supposed to stay separate from daily politics, but still closely connected to Wall Street. It could print money, set interest rates, and act as the lender of last resort. In reality, it became America's new financial engine, privately influenced, but publicly powerful. Most people didn't realize how much authority had just been created. World War I was the first real test. The cost of industrial warfare was huge, far more than taxes could cover, and once again, central banks stepped in. They printed money, sold government bonds, and kept nations running. The gold standard, the old system that kept money tied to gold, was suspended. The lesson was clear and harsh. When governments face a major crisis, central banks will always finance them. Printing money was no longer a last resort. It became policy. By the end of the war, inflation had spread through Europe. Germany's central bank, under political pressure, printed so much money that it became worthless. Weimar Germany's hyperinflation is still the most famous example of a central bank destroying its own economy. But even this disaster didn't end the experiment. It only proved how central banks had become essential, whether they created stability or helped cause collapse. The Great Depression showed a darker side of central banking. In the late 1920s, heavy speculation pushed markets higher and higher. When the bubble finally burst in 1929, the Federal Reserve didn't act strongly enough. Banks failed. Credit disappeared. Millions of people lost their jobs. Economists still debate whether the Fed's strict policies made the crisis worse, but one thing became clear. The decisions of a central bank can shape the lives of millions. Governments took notice. After World War II, world leaders tried to organize central banking at a global level. In 1944, while the war was still going on, representatives from 44 countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal was ambitious: to create a new international financial system. At the center of this system would be the U.S. dollar, backed by gold. Other currencies would link themselves to the dollar, and new institutions, like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, would help stabilize the global economy. But behind all of this was a simple reality. The U.S. Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury were now at the heart of the world's financial system. Money itself had become a geopolitical tool. This system collapsed in 1971. Rising debts from the Vietnam War and high domestic spending put huge pressure on America's gold reserves. Other countries started demanding gold in exchange for their dollars. President Richard Nixon had two options: let the U.S. lose its gold, or break the system entirely. He chose to break it. On August 15, 1971, Nixon announced that the dollar would no longer be convertible into gold. The foundation of the Bretton Woods system was gone. From that point on, the world entered the era of pure fiat money, currencies backed not by metal but simply by government decisions, controlled by central banks. The age of limits was over. Central banks now had almost unlimited freedom. Central banks could create money whenever they wanted. And they did. Just look at the major crises of the past 50 years. In the 1980s, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker raised interest rates to nearly 20% to stop runaway inflation. It caused a painful recession, but it restored confidence in the U.S. dollar. The Fed showed that with one decision, it could reshape the entire economy. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. When the global system collapsed, central banks reacted with massive force. The Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan created trillions of dollars, euros, and yen to save banks and stabilize markets. They called this quantitative easing. For Wall Street, it was a lifesaver. For everyday people, it felt like their savings were being stolen. Low interest rates and rising asset prices helped a small group get richer, while everyone else struggled. Then came 2020. During the pandemic, money printing went into overdrive. Central banks created money on a scale nobody had ever imagined. Stimulus checks, corporate bailouts, rescue packages, all funded by money that appeared with a single keystroke. The balance sheets of major central banks exploded to record levels. And the explanation was always the same: stability. But the cost was inflation, massive asset bubbles, and a growing realization that money is now whatever central bankers say it is. Here's the hidden truth. Central banks are not neutral referees. They are power brokers. Central banks decide who gets hurt in a recession and who gets rescued. They decide which institutions survive a crisis and which ones are allowed to fail. They can reduce the real value of debt through inflation or create painful deflation by tightening money. Their decisions affect your life more than any vote you will ever cast. Yet they operate behind a wall of complexity. Interest rates, liquidity programs, bond purchases, technical words that hide a simple truth. Central banks create money and control credit on a scale no private company could ever match. Every time they step in, their power grows. Every time they print money to save the markets, the system becomes more dependent on them. Each bailout and every liquidity injection makes people expect that next time will be the same. The result is a global economy addicted to central bank support. And now the contradictions are getting bigger. Governments run massive deficits, assuming their central banks will keep interest rates low. Banks take risky bets, knowing they'll be rescued if things go wrong. Investors inflate bubbles convinced the Fed put will always protect them. But history shows one harsh truth: illusions eventually break. The Bank of England lost credibility in the 1700s. Germany's Reichsbank collapsed into hyperinflation. The Bretton Woods monetary system fell apart in 1971. Every financial system, no matter how strong, has a breaking point. So what does this mean for you? It means recognizing that central banks, not politicians, are the real managers of money. When they let your wages fall behind inflation, when they tighten conditions and your mortgage suddenly doubles, when they save the markets, asset owners win and savers lose. It means understanding that the modern world runs on trust, and trust is fragile. If people lose confidence in the dollar, the euro, or the yen, no central bank can create credibility out of thin air. It means remembering that real security doesn't come from the promises of bankers, but from assets they cannot print: gold, land, skills, and real businesses. These are the things that have survived every collapse in monetary trust. The secret history of central banks isn't really a secret. It's visible in every crisis, every bailout, and every wave of inflation we've seen. These institutions were originally created to serve governments. They grew by financing wars. They expanded by managing crises. And today, they sit at the center of a global financial system. They are not elected. They are not accountable the way presidents or parliaments are. Yet their decisions affect your life more than almost any law. This is the paradox of modern finance. The people we never vote for control the money we depend on every day. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The answers aren't hidden in the future. They've been written in the past all along.